Hello everyone. In today's session, we are going to cover the next topics on a Azure virtual machine. In previous sessions, we have seen how do we provide high availability for virtual machines using availability zones and availability sets. Now, in this session, we are going to talk about Azure encryption, disk encryption, and disks. And in case if the time permits, we'll even talk about the size, VM virtual machine size and all that. So coming to virtual machine skill sets and all that, that's going to take another session entirely. Probably I'll be talking about moving how to move virtual machines and virtual machine skill sets in one session. But in this session, we'll primarily focus on disk encryption. What are the encryption methodologies are there in Azure virtual machine? And what is disks and all that. So let me quickly open Google and I'll just say virtual machine encryption. Now, if you could see, uh, they started with the overview of managed disk encryption options and all that. And we have four options here. One is the server side encryption, which is by default provided by Azure. And so when you're creating a virtual machine, by default, this encryption methodology will be enabled, which is Azure Disk Storage Server-Side Encryption. Now, what is that? Uh, this is like the data which is being stored uh, in the uh, what do you say in the Azure that will be encrypted, and you can use your own encryption keys also, custom managed encryption keys also, and you can encrypt it. Uh, So there are two types of encryptions when we are talking about server side, which is customer managed encryption, and one is Microsoft managed encryption. So if you can refer, this is always enabled and automatically encrypts data stored on the Azure managed disks when persisting on storage clusters. So what is this? So whatever data which is actually stored in these disks, when that is being persisted into the actual storage of the Azure, during that point of time, the encryption will be enabled. So understand that. So when you're creating a machine and you're having a OS disk, data disk, this is among their huge data which they have, their hard disks or the hard drives they have, or the store SSDs they have, whatever the storage or physical storage device they have, from that they're giving a part of it from what you have requested and all that. Now, when you're storing the data in these disks, and that is actually getting stored in Azure in a physical device, during that point of time, the encryption will be taken care. Okay, so this way your data is completely secured from the other resource pool storages which Azure is providing. అంటే సింపుల్గా ఇఫ్ యూ టాక్ అబౌట్ వర్చువల్ మెషిన్ క్రియేట్ చేస్తున్నప్పుడు ఒక ఓఎస్ డిస్క్ అనేది క్రియేట్ అవుతుంది బై డిఫాల్ట్గా క్రియేట్ అవుతుంది. ఈ ఓఎస్ డిస్క్లో ఏంది అని అంటే ఓఎస్ రిలేటెడ్ డేటా అంతా స్టోర్ అయి ఉంటుంది. బట్ యూ ఆల్సో వాంటెడ్ సమ్ టైమ్స్ ఆర్గనైజేషన్స్ ఏం చేస్తాయంటే దే విల్ క్రియేట్ దేర్ ఓన్ ఎక్స్ట్రా డేటా డిస్క్స్ అన్నమాట. సో ఇఫ్ యూర్ సీయింగ్ ఇన్ యువర్ మెషిన్స్ సి డ్రైవ్, ఈ డ్రైవ్, డి డ్రైవ్ ఇవన్నీ ఉంటాయి కదా. సో లైక్ వైజ్ ఓకే, యూ విల్ మెయింటైన్ నదర్ డేటా డ్రైవ్, హార్డ్ డిస్క్ లాగా అదర్ డేటా డిస్క్ which will be linked to the machine, and you will store the actual application data, ఏవైనా కాన్ఫిడెన్షియల్ డేటా ఇవన్నీ దాంట్లో స్టోర్ చేసుకుంటాం. సో దట్ ఈవెన్ ఒక వర్చువల్ మిషన్ కరప్ట్ అవుతే ఓఎస్ డిస్క్ అనేది పోయి ఉంటుంది, లేకపోతే మిషన్ పోతుంది, కానీ డేటా డిస్క్లో స్టోర్ అయిన డేటా మాత్రం పోదు. ఓకే, So these are the two disks which are there. Now, when we are trying to talk about encryption, అసలు encryption అనే క్వశ్చన్ ఎందుకు వచ్చింది? ఫస్ట్ ఎందుకంటే how can you organization will trust we storing data in an Azure location? Uh, what is the guarantee that, or what is the how can we promise data integrity that your data is not tampered, data is not being utilized, no one is actually being watching your data and all that? How can we know this? Okay, for that reasons, okay, encryption is a feature that Azure is providing, and every cloud service provider provides that to the customer. Now, in that, one of the encryption methodologies, server-side encryption, and server-side encryption లో వచ్చినప్పటికి టూ టైప్స్ ఆఫ్ ఎన్క్రిప్షన్స్ ఉన్నాయి. మైక్రోసాఫ్ట్ మేనేజ్డ్ కీస్ ద్వారా, అంటే ఒక ఎన్క్రిప్షన్ చేద్దాం అనుకుంటున్నప్పుడు కొన్ని కీస్ యూజ్ చేయాలి. ఎన్క్రిప్షన్ కీస్ అంటాం దాన్ని. ఓకే, అది మైక్రోసాఫ్ట్ మేనేజ్ చేస్తుందంటే ఆ కీస్ మేనేజ్ చేస్తే దాన్ని మైక్రోసాఫ్ట్ మేనేజ్డ్ ఎన్క్రిప్షన్ అంటాం. And if at all, we are trying to say that customer is managing those key encryption keys, how you're creating it and how you're rotating it and all that time to time, then the customer, if he's taking care of, he or she is taking care of that, then that will become a customer managed encryption keys. ఓకే, సో నో ఈ సర్వర్ సైడ్ ఎన్క్రిప్షన్ లోకి వచ్చినప్పటికి అసలు ఏ టెక్నాలజీ ద్వారా పాయింట్ ఆఫ్ వ్యూలో అసలు ఎన్క్రిప్ట్ అవుతుంది అని అంటే, వెన్ యువర్ మెషిన్ ఈజ్ యూజింగ్ ద ఓఎస్ డిస్క్ అండ్ డేటా డిస్క్, ఈ డిస్క్స్ లో, and actually that data is stored somewhere in the physical storage devices of an Azure. During that point of time, the encryption is happening is what I'm trying to say. That is what the server side encryption is. Okay. So the next one is encryption at host. Now this is a double layer of encryption. You are encrypting the data when it is getting stored in the physical devices and all that. Now, what is encryption at host? You are encrypting even this physical device where that actually is being stored. దాన్ని కూడా encrypt చేద్దామని అనుకుంటున్నారు. Okay, when you're trying to encrypt that one, so that's why this, when you say encrypt at host, this is the host machine. ఆ హోస్ట్ మెషిన్ లో ఒక పార్ట్ ఆఫ్ ద డేటా కస్టమర్స్ కి అందరికి ఎవరెవరైనా క్రియేట్ చేసుకున్నా, బికాస్ ఇట్ విల్ హ్యావ్ ఎ హ్యూజ్ అమౌంట్ ఆఫ్ డేటా టు స్టోర్ అండ్ ఆల్ దట్. Now you may be only requesting 64 GB, someone is requesting 256 GB, someone is requesting 1 TB అలాగా. Now based on that they will be giving that allocation of that space. So when we are only encrypting data when it is getting stored, but not this is not being encrypted. Now, if you want to get this also to be encrypted, you can just enable encryption at host option when you're creating the machine, and that will also get encrypted. So that's one of the methodology of encryption. So encryption at host, server-side encryption. So when you're enabling server-side encryption and you storing the data, that is time is getting encrypted, and encryption at host is encrypting that entire host. So you can do this simultaneously without any issue. Okay. Now what is disk encryption? So the data that is getting stored in the storage clusters, that is what is being encrypted. Now VM is trying to store whatever you are trying to store in the disks. You can even encrypt that. Okay. Now how do you the virtual machine, when that is being using the disks, OS disk or data disk, it can even encrypt it. So that is called Azure Disk Encryption. And before you storing into the disks, if you want to encrypt it into that virtual disks, whatever it is, OS disk or data disk, if you want to encrypt it, then you will use Azure Disk Encryption. Now that methodology is, if you want to, if you're using a Linux machine, then you will use VM decrypt feature to encrypt. If you are using a Windows machine, then you will use BitLocker. So using these softwares, the data when it's getting stored in the disk, it will be encrypted. So you can also see that helps you protect, safeguard your data to meet your organization security compliance commitments. AD encrypts the OS and data disks of Azure virtual machines inside your VMs itself. Okay. So you can enable this option also if you wanted. And AD is integrated with Key Vault. So how do you can enable this one? Uh, you can enable with Key Vault, and you can follow these methods to do this process. Then next is confidential VMs. How the next methodology. So this is not heavily used by everything. It's uh, it's actually for the confidential machines. So when you are actually creating Azure virtual machines, you can choose to uh, encrypt for your confidential machines and all that. And how when you want to do that, you can do this. So ikkada one key example is on the which I wanted to say. Mm, So when you're enabling storage encryption, temporary disk and disk caches won't get encrypted. Okay. Now, if you enable encryption at host, temporary disks and disk caches are encrypted also. So this is another extra layer of protection. And when you wanted the entire transactions, everything to be happening in the confidential computing endpoint of view, you can enable this and you're using confidential disk encryption. This is a more secured way, but this is something which just came recently, and it's not for every machine you are able to see it. So the most important are this: how do you enable disk encryption, and how you can use server-side encryption and all that. So let's get to that. When I'm creating a machine, I'll choose standard. So if you see here, there's an option called confidential virtual machines. Now that is when you can choose that option, not needed to speak too much on that. Uh, Once I choose the image and everything, and I'll just give the name trainer Indian at the rate 1234567 Indian at the rate 1234567. Now here, if you see how am I able to encrypt my disk, I'm using platform managed or customer managed or both customer and platform managed. If I wanted to use this option, so this is you can encrypt your disks and all that. You can even encrypt your host by enabling this one. No, but before you utilizing this, what they're trying to say is my subscription, wherever I'm trying to create, there the option of encryption at host should be enabled. To do that, you just have to run a command, and you can see that through PowerShell or through CLI, you can register the encryption at host feature that is available in Microsoft.compute API provider. So these are all APIs and all today. So what you're trying to do is you're enabling your subscription to use certain API, which that in terms of compute resources, that one of the API feature is encryption at host, and that's what is saying that inside a compute Microsoft.compute specific services, I wanted to use a feature called encryption at host, and that has to be enabled, and before you enable it, you're setting which subscription you wanted to set -az context is ensuring that when you have multiple subscriptions, you're selecting one subscription as your subscription, and in that Azure subscription, you're creating a feature. You're enabling a feature for the compute resources. Now it is completely fine మీకు అర్థం కాకపోయినా ఇప్పుడు ఏమి అంత కమాండ్స్ అర్థం కాకపోయినా, but try to understand from this wording naming convention. Set hyphen AZ context subscription is like setting that specific subscription. Register hyphen AZ provider feature. You're registering and provide feature so with so and so name from the API, a bigger API called compute resources. Because how is Azure able to manage all these services? If you see, there are too many services, storage services, compute services, container services. They are coming in subsection. And when you are utilizing from cloud, మీరు ఏమైనా క్రియేట్ చేస్తున్నప్పుడు end of day for Azure, it is like a software they have designed behind the scenes, and that is running on the physical devices. So how they organized everything, so is through that. And ఇక్కడ మనం వర్చువల్ మిషన్ క్రియేట్ చేద్దాం అనుకుంటున్నప్పుడు యూ సీన్ ది ఎన్క్రిప్షన్ at host, and that is like encrypting the entire physical devices where that is being stored. And the storage side encryption ఇంకా చూడలేదు, మనం disk encryption చూసాం, where when the VM wherever it has to, అది it is can be stored, use you can use vEncrypt or BitLocker if you are choosing in disk, if you are choosing customer managed encryption and all that. So for that you need to have disk encryption sets. ఇక్కడ currently ఏమంటున్నారంటే you don't have disk encryption sets to enable customer encryption. So if I want to enable disk encryption sets, I have to create those. I have to uh, enable a virtual machine. Sorry, so key vault ని create చేయాలి, which will store, it will securely store the data. Uh, So key vault is like storing encryption keys, storing secrets, స్టోరింగ్ సర్టిఫికేట్స్. ఇవన్నీ పర్పస్ కి కీ వాల్ట్ అనేది ఒక ఫంక్షనాలిటీ విత్ సర్వీస్ విచ్ ఇస్ ప్రొవైడ్ బై అజూర్. We call it as secret management solution or certificate secret management or a secure uh, vault where we can store some sensitive, very confidential, sensitive data that can be utilized for the other services. So what this service offers is a unique way of accessing. To access that sensitive data, you need to do another set of extra permissions and all that. And the way it is being stored is more secure. So based on this, uh, so you when you want to store data and everything using key vault and all that, you'll be charged accordingly. సో ఎన్క్రిప్షన్ కీస్ ఏమైనా మనం క్రియేట్ చేసుకునేటప్పుడు మన చేసుకోవాలంటే కస్టమర్ మేనేజ్డ్ ఎన్క్రిప్షన్ కీస్ యాజ్ ఐ మెన్షన్, వీఆర్ ద వన్స్ హూ వాంటెడ్ టు మేనేజ్ ఇట్ ఎన్క్రిప్షన్ ఎవ్రీథింగ్ కీ. సో ఎన్క్రిప్షన్ మనం కీస్ మనం క్రియేట్ చేయాలి. సో ఫర్ దట్ యూ విల్ యూస్ టు ఫస్ట్ క్రియేట్ కీ వాల్ట్, అండ్ వెన్ యూర్ క్రియేటింగ్ key vault you will enable disk encryption. ఇక్కడ ఈ ఆప్షన్ ఉంటుంది, షో disk encryption for volume encryptions. So you can use this key vault when you're creating. If you enable this option, you can use it for disk encryption sets. ఇదంతా okay. So that's about machine. Uh, Whatever it is, if you're choosing customer encryption, by default Microsoft will manage that. So that's what is platform managed encryption key. So you can choose that one option if you want. And even when I'm creating a disk, if I can attach more amount of disk, I can even do that. How can I do? First, they're asking to select the subscription, resource group, test VM, and ikkada you can even see this option for the data disk, whichever you're creating, would it be managed by customer managed or not. So by default, they are saying that we will manage the keys. Microsoft or Azure will manage the keys. Now, if you wanted, you have to go and select that. What is this platform managed in it? So a set of keys will be managed by Microsoft, and a set of keys that will be managed by you. You will use this both for the encryption and all that. So you can increase the complexity of that based on the conditions that have to be met. Mm, What other options do we have? So this is about disk encryption. So that covers. Let's talk about how do we manage virtual machine disks. When you're creating virtual machines, test VM 01. You can see this disk option, and here uh, the source type, you can select what you wanted the disk to be. I wanted it to be an empty disk, so I'll just click on OK. So I just created one more data disk I wanted to get created while I'm using this. So you can create more amount of disks you wanted. Now, what you have to do is, if you wanted, you can create disks or you can utilize existing data disk also. If I have more amount of data disk in my subscription, I can even click on attach the existing disk and the list will show up. But remember that if I want to attach a disk to a machine, the virtual machine, where am I creating? In which region am I creating? So the data center I am preferring is Central India Data Center location, and the disk should also be in that location when I'm doing it. Only then, if I have disk in that location, wherever I'm creating the virtual machine or wherever the machine is, then I can choose it. So this disk will provide what is the importance of having a data disk. You can receive this question, and you have to first also understand the importance of why you need to have a disk. So OS disk will help in terms of storing the OS data, and you can use that OS disk also to store the application data and all that. But the only risk which will happen is if the machine gets corrupted because of one or other reason, then you will not be able to access this machine, and you may not be able to even access the disk also. Now, during that time, you're entirely locked. Uh, when you are logged, you can go ahead and create another machine and you can start working. But what if the application data that is being stored in that machine, that will be lost? You can't access it. So organizations will create an extra set of disks that can be used in the virtual machine. And in the from that machine, whatever the data getting stored, you can link it to E drive, D drive, C drive, and all that, and you can store in that data disks. And you can remove what you're trying to do here. You are creating disks, new disks, and link to VM, or you can link existing VM disks. If you want to link existing VM disks, they should be available be in same region. That is one condition. Second condition is that disk should not be linked to another VM. If you're linking that disk to another VM entirely, uh, and if you wanted that disk again simultaneously to be linked to another set of VM, that is going to be a tough uh, place for the disk. So either you have to first detach, if at all it is the disk has been linked to a VM, so let's say VM1, but you wanted to link that disk to VM2. Why? Because the data which is there, you wanted to link. Now, at that point of time, you will first remove the disk from VM1 and you will link that disk to uh, VM2. Okay, now how do you delink and do this? So let's see. So I'll just create a machine as of now. I'll remove all this. Disable this. Let the machine get created. We could see that machines got created. Let me go inside the machine. No, where is this? There it is, disks. So we have an already machine OS disk which is already there, which will get created by default when you are creating the machine. So if I go inside this resource group, I have an OS disk. You can see the naming convention here, OS disk. And this is a data disk which I've created. Now, if I want to, during the VM creation itself, I no need to link disks and all that. Even after the creating machines also, I'll be in a position to create or attach existing disks. If I want to create new disks, I can just name it as test VM01 or whatever it is, data disk 02 or 1. And how much GB I wanted, I just wanted a 64 GB disk. Okay, I'll use the platform managed encryption itself and I'll just click on apply. So what is going to happen? A new disk, empty disk is going to get created and that will be linked to the virtual machine. So let us wait for this to get completed. So machine got updated. Now I have two disks. Now if I have another machine and I wanted the data is being stored in the data disk 1, ఆ డిస్క్ లో ఉన్న డేటా నేను ఇంకొక మిషన్ ద్వారా యాక్సెస్ చేసుకుందాం అనుకుంటున్నా. సో ఐ క్రియేట్ వన్ మోర్ మిషన్. Test VM02. Let's say that. Leave these things. I'll just mention trainer Indian at the rate 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. Now here in the disks option, I can, if I want to choose the existing attached disks, there is nothing which I could see here. If I want to create, I can go ahead and create one. Why I don't see? Because I could see here there are these disks, disks data disk 01, data disk 0, and OS disk, but I'm not able to see that because those are machine, those are not available. So if I could remove those, how could I remove it? I go inside the machine, in the disk option, I could remove that. So you can remove it through this one detach option. You click on detach and you click on apply. Now when you click on detach and apply, the disk will get detached for the machine. That is an disk that may have a data if you would have stored data inside that using your machine. If you don't have data in it, it's an empty disk. Okay. As of now, I didn't store anything data in it. I just used నేను VM virtual machine create చేస్తున్నప్పుడు that is when I went ahead and created that. Okay. So there is no as such any specific compulsion that you have to store the disk and all that. But it generally makes sense in a scenario ఆర్గనైజేషన్స్ లో ఏదో ఒక అప్లికేషన్ ఏదో డేటా స్టోర్ చేసి ఉంటుంది ఏదో డేటా డిస్క్ లో అది తీసుకెళ్లి దాన్ని స్నాప్ షాట్స్ గా విడగొట్టి స్నాప్ షాట్స్ ని డిస్క్ గా కన్వర్ట్ చేసి ఇంకొక మిషన్స్ కి లింక్ చేయొచ్చు లేదా ఆ డిస్క్ ని తీసుకెళ్లి ఇంకొక మిషన్ కి లింక్ చేయొచ్చు ఏదో ఒక యూస్ కేస్ ఉంటుంది ఓకే సో యూ హ్యావ్ టు ఇమాజిన్ ద నీడ్ ఓకే యూ నీడ్ టు థింక్ ఇన్ దాట్ పాయింట్ ఆఫ్ వ్యూ ఒక మిషన్ అంటే ఒక మిషన్ కే ఉండకపోవచ్చు కదా దేర్ విల్ బి హండ్రెడ్స్ ఆఫ్ మిషన్స్ ఇన్ జనరల్లీ ఈచ్ మిషన్స్ కెన్ హ్యావ్ 2 or 4 or 5 10 డిస్క్స్ అవ్వచ్చు 1 డిస్క్ అవ్వచ్చు 2 డిస్క్స్ అవ్వచ్చు ఎనీథింగ్ ఉండొచ్చు ఓకే So if when I'm creating next time a machine, I'll be able to see the disk. Why did I detach to show you? It's like I can able to see the disk. I click on this, I click on existing edit disk. I have to refresh this. You will have this kind of challenges, but you have to refresh it before you're creating one. Did it get detached first place? Yeah, that got detached. This is in central India. This is the data center. There was some issue. Let's see. Maybe it is because of this. Select an existing disk. So here I could able to see it. Why am I right now able to see it is because this machine may be not being created in any zones. It is not having any availability zone. It was just created a standard availability. Okay. So there is no availability option that was being used when I'm creating this machine. So the disk also would have been not been the availability zone point of view and all that. So when you wanted to link and all that, you have to be taking care of that availability options. Based on that only you will be able to see. And you can see here that I could able to see the existing disk and I can attach it if I wanted. Mm, so this is it about disks. And we will be talking about virtual machine sizes and how do we move virtual machines and virtual machine scale sets in the next topics. But for today, I think this is good enough. Thank you.